Okay. Okay. Here we go. We're today's Daf Bez Hashem is Daf Kuf Vav, and we're going to begin from Daf Kuf Hey Yomid Beis with again discussing the topic of what is called shoichad. Shoichad for bribery for a judge, and it could be in the form of words. Being too nice to a judge can disqualify a judge. And the Gemara says right now a fascinating story. The Gemara says Rav Onan Aise Le Ahu Gavra Kanta. Rav Onan, there was a man that brought to him Kanta de Gildone, which means a basket of fish, the Begile. The Begile. Kanta de Gildone, it's a type of basket which was full of little fish. Amalei, so Rav Onan asked him a question, my aviditech, why are you bringing this to me? What do I know you? Amalei, so the man said, Dina Isli, I have a judgment case with you, and you're going to be the judge. So I thought I'd bring you a basket of fish. So loy kabel minay. So Rav Onan did not want to accept it from him. Obviously, he thought he was bribing him, but even if he was just giving a gift to a Talmud Chacham, he still didn't want to accept it for him. I'm disqualified. Amalei, Rav Onan told the man, Pasilnu loch ledina, I am disqualified from being your judge. Okay, so the man was okay with that. Amalei, he said, Dina demar labina, I don't need you to be my judge, but kabule le kabule mar, deloy lemanen mar me'akruve bikurim. You should accept my gift because it's a token of my appreciation to Talmidei Chachamim. And it says in a brisa that when you give a gift to a Talmud Chacham, it's almost like giving the bikurim to a kohen. Why? The Tanya we learned in a brisa, the ish bo mibal shalisha v'yove leish olechim lechem bikurim esrem lechem so'irim b'karmel b'tzikloine. So a man came, it says in Malachim Beis, then brought to Elisha 20 loaves of bread as bikurim. So the Gemara asks a question: V'chi Elisha oichel bikurim hava? Did Elisha eat bikurim? We know that you only give bikurim to a kohen, and Elisha was from Shevet Gad. Ella loymelacha. This teaches you called hamevi darin leTalmud Chacham. Anybody who brings a gift for a Talmud Chacham, ki'ilu makre bikurim, as if he's giving a bikurim to a kohen. In other words, the whole idea of bikurim to show appreciation for the kohen doing the service. When you give a gift to a Talmud Chacham from your own pocket, it's as if you're giving a gift to a kohen. You're showing appreciation to the protection that we have because somebody is dedicating their life to learning. So so therefore this man said, okay, to Rav Onan, don't become my judge because you may consider it like I'm trying to bribe you. Nevertheless, accept my present, my gift to you, as somebody who wants to give a gift to a Talmud Chacham who wants to be makriv bekurim. So Amalei Rav Onan acquiesced and he said, Kabuli loy be'inin the ikabo. But I really did not want to accept this gift. But Hasha da Amrit li Tama, now that you gave me a nice reason, Mikabelna, I'm going to accept the gift. And nevertheless, because he was disqualified, Rav Onan disqualified himself from being the judge. Shadari lekamid Rav Nachman. So he sent him over to Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman should adjudicate the case. Shalach le, and Rav Onan sent a message to Rav Nachman. Nidaini le mar lahai gavra. You should be the judge for this person. Danan anan, me anan pasilin leiladina. I disqualified myself from being the judge. So Rav Nachman understood that from this message that Rav Onan sent him, Omar, he said, Mi disholach lehachi, since Rav Onan sent me this message, shmami na krivehi. It must mean that this person is somehow related to Rav Onan. And therefore, I should show extra respect for this relative of Rav Onan, who I'm going to adjudicate a case. So the Gemara says, "Havakoim dina diasmakame." Actually, in line to Rav Nachman's court, there was a case of orphans. There was a case of orphans in front of him, and therefore, but now this Rav Onan's messenger came to him with this guy, and he's Omar. So Rav Nachman said, we're on, hi Lewis, we're on Daf Kuvav Omar Aleph. Omar, he said, hi essay, v'hi essay. He said like this, that both to judge correctly is a mitzvah assay, and it's also a mitzvah say to show respect to Talmidei Chachamim. And his misunderstanding of Rav Anan's message, Rav Nachman thought that this person is a relative of Rav Anan. So he gave him precedence, and he pushed him ahead of the line, this case in front of a case of orphans, because he said, it is better to show respect, to honor Torah, and to honor Rav Anan's relative and give him a front place in line, even though he showed up later. Rav Nachman pushed away the case concerning the Yisayimim, and started to adjudicate his case. So, Kevin the Chazid Baldine Yakara the Ka'avidle, since the other litigants saw all the respect given to this person, who was mistakenly thought of as Rav Anan's relative, Istatein Tanase, he became stumbled in what his side of the story was, and he didn't express himself well, and he probably lost the judgment. So in Shamayim, in heaven, Rav Anan was held accountable for this miscarriage of justice. So the Gemara says that Rav Anan was punished in a certain way. He was a big tzaddik, Rav Anan. Havarogel Eliyahu de Osegabe. Eliyahu Hanavi used to come learn with Rav Anan. The Havamasna le Seidid de Eliyahu. He would teach him certain brises that was the teachings of Eliyahu Hanavi. So Rav Anan wrote a book, Tanu Debe Eliyahu, things that he learned from Eliyahu Hanavi. And this was a common visitor to Rav Anan. But since this miscarriage of justice came about through Rav Anan's mistake, Istalak, Rav Anan, he never came back to Rav Anan anymore. He didn't want to come teach him Torah anymore. Yosef B'Tanisa, so Rav Anan felt very bad, and he started fasting. Uboya Rachamen, he started praying. Va'asa and Eliyahu Navi came back. But this time, he came back. In the previous time, Eliyahu Navi would learn with him like he was in a regular human body. Eliyahu Navi can take on the form of a human. But when he came back the second time, Hava Mavis Lebuusa, Rav Anan was frightened of him because he came back as a malach, as an angel. So therefore, Rav Anan continued to learn with Eliyahu Navi, but Va'avet Tevusa V'Yasav Kameh, he made like a box, like a miniature closet, and he put himself in the box, and that's how he learned in front of Eliyahu Navi. He didn't want to see the angel, and therefore he was a different type of learning. Ad apek le sidre, until they finished learning. That's why there's people say there's two types of Eliyahu brises and teachings of Eliyahu Navi that were written down by this Rav Anan. Seidid Eliyahu Rabbah. One of them is called the Great Eliyahu Navi, things that I learned from Eliyahu the Great. Then the other one is called Seder Eliyahu Zuta. This is the teachings of Eliyahu the Small. In other words, when he learned with Eliyahu Navi and he was able to face to face with Eliyahu Navi and learn with Eliyahu Navi like you learn with a Chavrusa, so that was a greater type of learning. And Rav Onan wrote those teachings down in that type of book called Eliyahu Seder Eliyahu Rabbah. After this mishap, and Rav Onan had to pray that Eliyahu Navi come back to learn with him, it was a different type of learning. It was like a smaller level of learning because he couldn't see Eliyahu Navi face to face because he was too frightened. And therefore he called the book Seder Eliyahu Zuta. That's why we find two books of teachings of Eliyahu Navi. One is Eliyahu Rabbah and one's called Eliyahu Zuta. Again, it was not so, we find in our generation, not our generation, but the Beis Yosef, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, also wrote a book, I forgot, called Magid Mesharim, I think it's called, that he had also a malach come from heaven, teach him Torah, and the teachings that he learned from this malach in heaven, this angel, he wrote it down in a book. So here you find that in the Gemara that Rav Onan was learning with Eliyahu Navi. The Gemara continues. B'shnei Rav Yosef, in Rav Yosef's time, Hava Rischa, God was angry. Now, we're going to learn Pshat that it wasn't that there was a shortage of food, but there was major inflation, okay? Like what you see what's going on today. It was major inflation. And therefore, people found it very difficult to afford things, to afford food. Amalehi Rabbanu Rav Yosef. So Rabbanan said to Rav Yosef, Liboya ma rachamei. Why don't you pray that this situation, this recession, this inflation should go away? Pray for us. Amalahu. So Rav Yosef said, I'm not praying. Hashtra, let us see. Uma Elisha. In Tanakh, you find Elisha Hanavi, and he was such a great teacher, Elisha. That he have a Rabbanim mipatri mikame, have a paishin tre alpha maser Rabbanim. When Elisha finished his, let's say, his lesson, his teaching, and everybody went home, so he had 2,200 Rabbanim stick around in the yeshiva. It's almost like when it's the semester is over, and yet there's still people in the dorm. So to speak, Elisha taught a big crowd, and the leftover from the crowd was 2,200 people. And so Elisha is the greatest teacher and the greatest Malamed, and a Navi too. And yet we find in Tanakh, Be'idin Rischa, when God was angry, Loi Hava Baya Rachme, he didn't pray. So Ana Ibaya Rachme, am I going to pray? So therefore, he didn't feel worthy enough to, that he should pray. I'm not sure why he didn't feel worthy, or is it just that, this is just normal events of life where you have inflation, there's contraction, and therefore he didn't feel that this is necessary to pray. That's why Rav Yosef did not pray in this situation. Now the Gemara asks a question. You just told me in Tanakh, Elisha, the teacher, he had 2,200 students that stuck around with him at all times, and he was responsible, so to speak. They stayed in the dorm. He was responsible for their food. So where do you see that in Tanakh? How do you know that this was left over by Elisha? Answers the Gemara, Diksiv, because the pasuk says, "Vayoyim Sharsai, lo etein zeh lifnei mei ish." The Tanakh describes that somebody brought to Elisha 22 loaves of bread. 22 loaves of bread. And his attendant told Elisha, what am I going to do with 22 loaves of bread? And divide it among 100 people. So the Gemara first asked, what do you mean? The 22 loaves of bread, it's a time of hunger. And so what's the problem? My lifnei mea ish. What's the problem of dividing 22 loaves of bread for 100 people? Even if it was a time of hunger, but if you're splitting 22 loaves of bread with 100 people, that should be sufficient in times of hunger. Ella, what they meant to say is the kol chad v'chad kamemei ish. In other words, we're splitting 22 loaves of bread, each loaf of bread for 100 people. So therefore, basically, it's 22 times 100. So the people that hung around Elisha and who Elisha was responsible for their food was actually 2,200 people. So the Gemara says, so that's the people that hung around Elisha. Now the Gemara describes what about other teachers in the Amoraim's time. When people would leave Rav's class, and the leftover people, it's not the people who just didn't go home. Have a paishe alpha maser rabbanim. What was remained was 1,200 people, rabbis. Maybe Rav Huna from the class that Rav Huna used to teach. Again, the leftover in the dorm, or the leftover that after the speech, the lecture was over, or maybe the Zman was over, have a paisha tmana mei rabbanim. There was 800 people, a little less. Now, the Gemara says Rav Huna gave such a class, and he had this like massive shear. Rav Huna have a darish betlesa amarai. There were 13 people all around let's say, the auditorium where Rav Huna gave his class, and they had to express their say over what Rav Huna was saying, because Rav Huna's could not have been heard because the crowd was so large. And the Gemara says, "Ki have kaimer rabbanim usifted Rav Huna." When the rabbis would, when they would leave the class of Rav Huna. In other words, it was time the shir was over and everybody's getting up. V'naftse gilimayu, and they were dusting off their jackets or pants from sitting on the floor. and everybody dusted themselves off to get ready to go home. Havasalik avokar, there was a dust cloud that rose up and covered the sunlight of the day. And this dusting cloud, so that's how many people that the dust went up and covered the sunlight. Va'amri b'marava, and people in Eretz Yisrael, Rav Huna gave his class in Bavel, and the people in Eretz Yisrael would know that once they were able to witness this dust cloud going up in heaven, that Kamilei Mesiftig Rav Huna Bavli, that they just finished the learning in Rav Huna the Babylonian. Okay, so that's I think it's obviously it's an exaggeration, but you get that idea. I remember when 9/11 happened, from the corner of the 878 by Share, you were able to see the big dust cloud from the Twin Towers. So something like that, they were able to see from a far away distance in Eretz Yisrael, and knowing at that moment Rav Huna's class was over and everybody's getting up to leave. That when the people would leave Rabbi Yosef's class, have a pasha arba meirabanim. Only 400 people, only 400 rabbis were left over. The Korel Nafshei Yasmei, they called themselves Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef like orphans, because they were not as great. They were not able to attract so many rabbis to their classes as in previous generations. When they would leave Abaya's class, and some say from the class of Rav Papa, some say from the yeshiva of Ashi. In other words, later generations, they weren't able to attract the kind of crowds that they used to attend the previous generations' shiurim. And so therefore, have a paisim, masim, rabbana. Only 200 rabbis remained. The Koren Nafshei, when they used to call themselves Yasmi the Yasmi, orphans of orphans, because when you compare us to let's say, those that were in Rav Yosef's time, were only 200. In their generation, it was 800. In Rav Huna's times, it was 800 people. In I guess in Rav's times, it was 1,200 people. It seems to go up in 400, and that's how the Gemara describes of the attraction of the earlier Tan Amoraim in able to attract people to their learning. Okay, now the Gemara discusses a couple of interesting things. We said before in our Mishnah that the judges of Jerusalem used to take their salary from Truma Salishka. In other words, what is Truma Salishka? Every year, you have to give half a shekel to the Beis Hamikdash. Normally, they would buy karbonos with that half a shekel, right? That half a shekel. In fact, what would they do? You would drop off a coin into a room in the Beis Hamikdash. You dropped off a coin. That was called the Lishka room. Let's call it a Lishka room. And that room was now full of coins up to the ceiling of people dropping off the machzis shekel. 3 times a year, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot, they would take a big box and they go into that room and scoop out money from in a box. And from that money, they would use the coins to buy karbonos, like the carbon tamid every day, the carbon musaf, and things like that, needed to keep the Beis Hamikdash going. These were called karbonos tzibur. So that was the use of that money. So the Gemara is now discussing what else did they use that money that was in those boxes. So Omar Rav Yitzchak Rav Difa Omar Abami Mevakri movement Shebiyushlayim Hoyanoit L'Schorim Mitruma Salishka. Actually, the people who had a job, and they were sort of people checking the animals to make sure that they didn't have any blemishes, because you can't bring a blemished animal onto the mizbeach, and therefore they were hired by the Beis Hamikdash to check the animals to make sure they don't have movement. If you go to Yerushalayim, and let's say, and you go to the shuk where they sell the lulav and esrogim, you have special people sitting at the table, and they'll check for you the lulav and esrog that you plan on purchasing. Anyway, they used to take their salary from the Truma Salishka. They came from the Machzas Shekel. Amar Rav Yehuda Mishmul, Talmidei Chachama Hamalamdim Hilchas Shchita Lekahanim. There were special teachers that would teach Hilchas Shchita to the Kahanim. They would take their their wages from the Trumas Alishka. Again, because this is Karbonis related. Anything Karbonis related comes from the Machzis Shekel. So if the Beis Hamikdash needed to hire teachers to teach the Kahanim how to slaughter, they took their salary from Trumas Alishka. So what the Gemara is saying is that Trumas Alishka wasn't only to buy, the Machzis Shekel didn't only buy animals. It actually used for things that are related to the carbon. There was other Talmidei Chachamim that taught the halachas of Kemitza to the Kahanim, how to do Kemitza, which is the thing, how you do sweeping up the flour and the oil when you makar of a carbon mincha. So they also took their salary from the Trumas Alishka. Amar Rabba Baba Chanan Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Magia Svarim Sheb'Yerushalayim Hayanoitlan Schar Mitrumas Alishka. Here's something different. They used to have scribes who would check Sifrei Torahs in Yerushalayim. In other words, if you had a private Sefer Torah in your house and you wanted to make sure it's correct, so you had a free service that you would go to these people and they would check to tell you if the Sefer Torah is kosher or not. And they took their wages from the Trumas Alishka. Now, really, this has nothing to do with Karbanas Tzibar, but the Bezdin made a special condition that they are allowed to take their salary from the Machzis Shekel, from the Trumas Alishka, because it could be very dangerous if you allowed people to have in their houses Sifrei Torah that have mistakes in them, and that people could come to the wrong conclusions by having a Sefer Torah that's not kosher in their house. So that was very important to have these people in Yerushalayim offering that free service, that if you want to have your Sefer Torah checked, it was free. And that was also, even though it's not related to Karbonos, the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan taught us that they used to take their wages from the Trumas Alishka. Then the Gemara says, Rav Nachman Omer Rav. Rav Nachman said in the name of Rav, Noshim ha'argus b'proiches neitlin scharos mitrumas alishka, that the people who would weave curtains in the Beis Hamikdash, there were certain places that they had a curtain. Most notably, they had a curtain dividing the Heichel from the Kodesh HaKadoshim, dividing where the menorah was, where the Shulchan was, where the Mizbeach HaPnimi was. They had a curtain, a double curtain, to divide what was behind that, which was the Dome of the Rock in the second Beis Hamikdash. In the first Beis Hamikdash, there was an actual wall there. In the second Beis Hamikdash, took the place of a wall, and therefore, according to the women, according to Rav, the women who wove those proiches took their wages from the Trumas Alishka, from the Karbonos money. That was in the name of Rav. Rav Nachman said, "Va'ani oima," but I disagree, and I said, "Mikochi bedek habayis." That's taken from another account, not from the account that was designated for the Machzis Shekel, because that's money that's supposed to be used to buy animals. But there was another account called, if you donated to the Bedek Habayis, you made a donation, you became a member, so to speak, of the Beis Hamikdash. They had another account for that. These curtains were made to take the place of walls. Anything that has to do with the construction of the Beis Hamikdash comes from another account, not from the Karbonos account, but it comes from the Bedek Habayis account. So that was Rav Nachman who disagreed with Rav. So the Gemara says, Meisvei, the Gemara asked a question against Rav Nachman. You said it came from the Bedek Habayis. We have a brisa that says, Noshen ha'argus b'proiches, the women that would weave the proiches, ubeis garmi and the albaisa lechem aponim, beis avtinim samaisa haktoris. The beis garmi taught who the bakers that did bake the lechem aponim, and the beis avtinis who created the ketoris. All these people, kulen nohayanaytlen schorad mitrumas halishka. The women who weave the proiches would take their wages from the Trumas Alishka. So this is a question against Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman said they took their wages from another account called Kachim Bedek Habayis, from the Bedek Habayis account. So how does he reconcile himself with this brisa? Answers Rav Nachman, Hosam b'devavi. Those were curtains that were made for modesty. Not every curtain took the place of a wall. Yes, the wall, the curtains that were separating the Heichel from the Kodesh HaKadoshim, those two curtains actually took the place of a wall. They came from Bedek Habayis. But sometimes they put up a curtain so that you wouldn't look in or stare into some room that had the door open. And therefore that it was just a curtain, like a paper shade. So therefore, it wasn't like representing the building of the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore, yes, I would agree those curtains can come from Trumas Halishka. Amar Rab Zera, Amar Rav, Shloisha Asa Pareiches Hayu B'Mikdash Sheni, Shiva Keneged Shiva Sha'arim, Echel Lepischei Shel Heichal, Ve'echel Lepischei Shel Ulam, Beis Badvir, Beis B'Keneged Aliyah. There were 7 major places, 7 openings that they used to put curtains up. One was at the opening of the Heichal or the opening of the Ulam. One was, there were 2 of them actually, as we discussed before, that was separating the Heichal from the Kodesh HaKadoshim, not only on the ground floor, but as you can see the picture of the Beis Hamikdash, it's like a double floor. So even the second floor, they had the 2 curtains separating the upper floor on top of the Kodesh HaKadoshim from the Heichal, from the front of the building to the back of the building. Anyway, so what the point is that there were other curtains that were not necessarily used to replace a wall, but they actually just put up, as a curtain for modesty reasons, so that people shouldn't stare into places that they're not supposed to look. Tanu Rabbanan, rabbis taught, Noshim Amagadlois B'neian Lepara are not Nuscharim B'Trumas Halishka. In Masechta Para Aduma, it describes that they used to have children involved in the creation of a Para Aduma for various reasons. But the point is that the women had to raise their children on a special kibbutz. That these children were growing up upon a special kibbutz, that their children would never have a tumah in their life. It was done in such a way that they wouldn't have any tumah. They were born and remained tahar up until they made the paraduma. So these women had to move into this kibbutz. So how did they, it's expensive for them. They have to leave their homes. So where did they take their wages for doing such a service? So they took their wages from the Trumas Halishka, because even though paraduma is something that was not brought in the Beis Hamikdash, it's not a carbon per se, it's actually brought on Har HaZeisim. Nevertheless, they also used to take their wages from Trumas Halishka. Abba Shaul says, no, there were plenty of women rich women who would offer to pay for these women to cover these women who are raising their children on this kibbutz for the paraduma, and therefore they didn't need to take the money from Trumas Halishka. No Gemara. Rav Huna asked a question from Rav. We go to Kof Vav Amid Beis. The Gemara asks a question. Kli shares mahu shiyasim yikache bedekabayis. Let's say, what happens? How would you describe this? Again, we know. Let's say this: the machzas shekel money that people donated to buy carbonis, and then there is bedekabayis money. People donated. It was no specific amount. You decided you want to make a donation to the Beis Hamikdash. You wrote a check for the Beis Hamikdash. That's called bedekabayis money. What happens? What about a kli shares? Let's say the vessel that you're trying to collect the blood when you slaughter an animal, to sprinkle on the mizbeach, certain vessels. Where did they take the money to buy those vessels? Tzarich mizbeach ninhu, since you're using it for the mizbeach, and the mizbeach is a fixed structure. The big mizbeach outside is a big fixed structure. So they took the funds to buy these vessels. And therefore, mikotche bedek habayis also. So they took it from the account of the bedek habayis. Or perhaps you say, tzarech carboninu. It has to do with the carbon, because the whole idea of buying this klisharis was if you slaughter a carbon, you needed something to collect the blood with. You needed a vessel, a special, golden or silver goblet to collect the blood. So it's related to carbonates. So therefore, it should come from the machzas shekel. They should have taken it from the trumas halishka. See, it's unbelievable. You can't commingle funds over here. If somebody is donating a machzas shekel, his thinking is that my money is going to buy the animal, not to buy some keli in the Beis Hamikdash. But perhaps, since it's necessary, this keli for the carbon itself, perhaps you could take it from the Trumas Halishka. So this is what Rav Huna asked. I believe it's Rav Huna who asked this question from Rav. So the Gemara answers. Rav answered him, "Ein nasan element Trumas Halishka." They took it from the Trumas Halishka money. So that's what they took it from the Machzas shekel money. So the Gemara says, "Esavei." Again, this is about the honesty of the Beis Hamikdash. You can't just use the money the way you want. So the Gemara says, what are you talking about? They took it from Trumas Alishka money. We have a pasuk in Divrei Yomim, which is Ksuvim. It says, they took the extra money from the Bedek Habayis and bought Klei Sharis. They actually bought Klei Sharis. So there's a pasuk in Ksuvim that says Beferish, they took it from Bedek Habayis money, not from the Machzas Shekel money. Amalei, so Rab answers that the akrayach ksuvim akrayach navi. You learn ksuvim, but the one that taught you ksuvim did not teach you navi, because there's a pasuk in navi that says ach liyasa beis Hashem sipes ki loisam lachi nu. You can't take bedek habayis money and buy vessels with it. You have to pay the workers the construction of the Beis Hamikdash. So therefore, they actually had to take other monies to use to buy the klei sharis. So the Gemara says, okay, now we have a stira psukim. Ihachi kashi kraya adadi. You have a contradiction between psukim. In Ksuvim, it says they use to buy klisharis from bedek habayis money, and in Nevi'im it says they could not use bedek habayis money to buy klisharis. So the Gemara says loy kasha. It's not a difficult. Kan shegavu v'hisiru. Kan shegavu v'hisiru. If they collected bedek habayis money in Divrei B'Yomim, they collected bedek habayis money, but they already finished the construction, and there's nothing else to do with that money. That money is sitting in an account, and the construction job is over. So if you have extra money, Bezdin says, okay, now you can use it to buy. If there's extra money, you can use it to buy klisharetz. In Nevi'im, it's describing where they still could have used the money for the construction. Shagavu, they collected the money. The loyasira was nothing left over. So then you can't buy klisharis with it. It has to strictly be used for the construction. So the Gemara says, "V'chigavu v'isiru my havi." But if someone gave to bedek habayis and it's left over, he wants his money to be used in the construction. How are you allowed to buy vessels which are, don't remain forever? Vessels break. And how are you allowed to use that money, even though it was leftover construction money, and decide to buy a klisharis with that? Amar Rababo says, Leiv Bezdin Masna Leim. The heart of Bezdin decides what to do with the money. In other words, when a person donated the money, he sort of like left it up to the board of the Beis Hamikdash to decide what to use the money. If there's extra money, they could give a dividend and give it back to the people, but they never did that. So if they need it for construction, they need it. If they don't need that money because the construction job is over, you can use it for klisharis. The Gemara continues over here. Talmud Bavli Rabbi Shmuel. Klei sharis boy mit trumas alishka. Like Rabbi Shmuel agreed. Klei sharis, you can buy it from the trumas alishka money. Shenema eshar hakesef. Ezul kesef sheyesh leishirayim haviyayim ezur trumas alishka. So in Rabbi Shmuel's interpretation of that pasuk, he learned that when that pasuk described that they bought klisharis in Divrei Yomim, it wasn't that they bought bedek habayis money and used it for klisharis. He says it was trumas alishka money. And how do you see it was trumas alishka money? Because it calls it sha'ar hakesef, kesef that caused a remainder. Well, trumas alishka money is kesef that causes a remainder, because you go into that room with all the coins and you scoop up with a box and you take it out. Well, that caused a remainder of money into the room. So that's money. That's the money that the pasuk is talking about. So it's trumas halishka money. It's machzas shekel money, and that's what the pasuk means in Divrei Yomim. They bought klisharis. So the Gemara says ve'ema shirayim gufayu. Maybe the pasuk is saying that they didn't take trumas halishka money from it, but they actually used the lishka money, the remainder of the lishka money. In other words, let's say the year was up and they finished, taking trumas lishka. After Sukkot, they took one more scoop from that room and they used that money to buy karbonis. Maybe what was left over in that room, that's what they used to buy the klisharis, not what was in the box which was meant to buy animals. Answers the Gemara, no. To the Amarava ha'oila rishayna, ha'chanami ha'kesef keserishim. When the Rava darshins, whenever it uses a hay, it means the first scoop. Like he says, ha'oila means the first oila, which refers to the oila satamid in that pasuk. So here it says ha'kesef kesef rishim. It's not referring to the remainder of what's in the room, but it's what's in the box. What's in the box itself, the first monies that you took out of the room, from those monies, you could actually buy vessels for the Beis HaMikdash. So, okay, so the Gemara now, what we're holding is, and we're almost done, is that from the machzas shekel money, after you scoop it out from the box of the room, you can actually use that money to buy animals, of course, but you could also buy vessels, vessels to catch the blood, klei sharis. So the Gemara says, Meisve, you have a question. There's a brisa. It says, "Hakatoris v'chol karbanis sina barmin trumas lishka." Katoris and any animal that you brought as a carbon came from the lishka money. Mizbech hazav ulavainav, the builder mizbech hazav, which was a movable type of mizbech, the gold mizbech, ukli shares, from kli shares, doesn't come from trumas lishka. It comes mimaisa nesachim, from the profits that the Beis HaMikdash made by selling wine and oil for people that needed it. So there was like another account called Meiser Nesachim, that which they used to, the Beis HaMikdash made a profit. From that profit, they used to buy klisharis. So again, klisharis, we see in this brisa, does not come from Trumas Lishka, but it actually comes from Meiser Nesachim. Mizbach ha'oilov alashkaris v'hazaris, boy mekatche bedek habayis, the Beis HaMikdash itself, the building itself, and even the Mizbeach ha'oila, that big Mizbeach outside, which was more of a permanent structure, to pay for that, they took from the donations of the Bedek Habayis account. Chutz l'chayim Zara, boy Mashiach l'shkais. Outside the Beis HaMikdash, if you wanted to fix, let's say, a sidewalk leading up to the Har HaBayis or something like that, so whatever, at the end of the year, whatever was remaining in that room, of the coins, because every year you had to make a new donation of machzas shekel. So what was ever remaining in that room, they used that to fix things that were beyond the walls of the Azara, beyond the walls of the Beis HaMikdash. Zuhi sheshinin, that's what we learned. Anything related to the city of Jerusalem outside the Beis HaMikdash, came from what was left over from that room. So this ends the question. You told me that klisharis comes from Trumas Lishka money, and here the Gemara says it comes from the profits that they made in selling wine and oil. Klisharis boim and ma'isa nesachem. So the Gemara says Tanoi, it's a machlekes Tanoim, where do they take the money to buy the klisharis? Now we learned in the Mishnah, ma'isa truma ma'ayisim, if there was leftover Trumas Lishka money, let's say it was Nisan, and they had still money in that box, but they don't need it anymore to buy karbanis tzibur, because you can only buy karbanis tzibur from the new machzas shekel. So if you had leftover money in that truma box, what did you do with it? They floored the base, the kachei kachim, with a floor of gold, of thin gold. Rabbi Shmuel says, Moisa Paris, the profits that the Beis HaMikdash made on investing on fruits, the Kaitzah Mizbeach. He said they used that for Kaitzah Mizbeach. Means that from those profits, they used to buy karbonis that were not necessarily karbonis tibur. It was just to keep the Mizbeach busy. They brought extra karbonis in the times when the Beis HaMikdash was slow, and they wanted to have the Mizbeach look busy. They had a profit center which would supply animals for the Kayetz HaMizbeach. Moiser Truma, what was left over from the boxes, the Kilisharis. So here, Rabbi Shmuel agrees with Rav that Moiser Truma, from the Truma Salishka money, you could buy a Kilisharis. Rabbi Kiva says Moiser Truma lekayetz HaMizbeach, Moiser Nesachim leklisharis. Rabbi Kiva said Moiser Nesachim is for the klisharis. So it's basically a machlekes between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Chanina Skana Kahana Moiser Nesachim lekayetz HaMizbeach. Moiser Truma leklisharis. He says Moiser Truma leklisharis. They didn't agree that there was an account in the Beis HaMikdash that they used to make money off selling fruit. What does that mean? Peris mahi. The Gemara explains that Tanya we learned in a brayso. Moiser Truma ma'ay oisimba. In Moiser Truma, let's say there was money left over in the box. So we know that the main keren, you could buy a klisharis, according to some opinions. But let's say you didn't need to buy a klisharis yet. According to the Brisa, Rabbi Shmuel held that you're allowed to actually invest the money. Like Chimperis Bezul, the Beis HaMikdash will now invest and buy fruits on the cheap, and sell it expensive. It's like, you're like a Havdal, an airport where the people come in, they want to buy something, you sell it to them expensive. And from the profits, they used to buy extra carbonas for the mizbeach. That's what we learned. Moisa Paris l'kayetz mizbeach. That was Rabbi Yishmael's opinion. Who didn't agree with that? Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Akiva did not agree that you can, take extra money that's just hanging around and start investing it. The Tanan we learned in the Mishnah. If there was money left over in the room itself, they would buy wine, oil, and flour, and the profit would go to Beis Hamikdash. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Akiva says, if the Beis Hamikdash accounts, no matter what account is there, if there's leftover money, they don't invest it. Why? You're not allowed to invest that money. If you have tzedakah money, you're also not allowed to invest it. So the Gemara says, Bishal Hegdish, my time Eloi. Why can't you invest the Beis Hamikdash money? Because ein aniyas b'makam ashiris. Because it shows that the Beis Hamikdash is in need of money, and therefore that's why they're investing their money. And we don't want to display poverty, what poor people do, so to speak, in a place that's supposed to be wealthy. So it's not respectful for the Beis Hamikdash if you take their money and you start investing it. B'shalem niyah my time. Why can't I play around with tzedakah money? Let's say they have no poor people to give the money, and there's money in the tzedakah account. You still can't invest that money. You never know when a poor person will show up, and you're not going to have the money readily available to give it to him. Therefore, we don't play around with tzedakah money. So that was the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. But Rabbi Yishmael held no, that you do play around with Beis Hamikdash money, and from that money you would buy kayetz mizbeach. But nevertheless, what you just learned from this brisa that there's a machlokes tanoim. If from the lishka money, from the leftovers of the lishka money you bought klisharis, or is it or was it profit from the sachin that you bought the klisharis from? Again, we just learned how important was it to have honest accounting in the Beis Hamikdash.